Um, Thank you very much to have the opportunity to present kids study in China. Actually, I'm working at Nestle Research Center. So as you know, as Aisen just presented, Feeds and Kids is a big research project globally, and China is part of it. Feeds is focused on, I don't know if you can see my pointer. No? Feeds is focused on children from 0 to 3 years old, and the Kids is focused on children from 4 to 13 years old. So today I'm going to present data from 4 to 13 years old in China. So this will be the agenda I'm going to follow. First is the introduction, and then followed by general information. And I will focus on two aspects. One is nutrient intakes, and then the meal pattern. And I will talk a little bit about the double burden of malnutrition. So let's start with introduction. First, I would like to thank our two great collaborators, our research partners. One is the Barry's group in the University of North Carolina. The second is the National Institute of Nutrition and Health in China, CDC. And the data we use in this study actually came from the China Health and Nutrition Survey. So what is China Health and Nutrition Survey? China Health and Nutrition Survey actually is a longitudinal study conducted by University of North Carolina together with China CDC. So you know that's why we have these two research partners. The study is a longitudinal study, so it started almost 30 years ago, and it repeated 2 or 3 years, each every 2 or 3 years. And the data actually we use are from 2011. We actually analyzed data for children from 4 to 13 years old. And the total sample size is around 1,500. The methodology for dietary intake data actually is the 24-hour recall method, plus it's in combination with in-household weighing, which means the investigators will went to the household, weigh whatever they have at the beginning and whatever they have in the end, and plus the inventory. So this provides us a quite good estimation of what has been consumed in this period of time. The response rate is pretty good, so 88% at individual level and 90% at household level. This is the map of China, and here the dark green actually highlighted those provinces included in this study. As you can see, from the northeast to the southwest, across different geographies and across different economic development stages. And in 2011, 3 megacities included: Beijing, Shanghai, and Chongqing. So each time when we talk about dietary intake study, we have to define what is the food groups. And the food group we use actually in the study is adopted the USDA What We Eat in America food group system. This is a very big table. I'm not asking you to read this because it's not possible. But in total, we have 14 big major food categories. Within each category, as Alice mentioned, there are subcategories. So in total, we have 150 food groups. Now, let's move on to the next session. It's general information. So this is a Chinese family. And you have grandparents sit in the middle, and 2 young couples, and one of the young couple has 1 child. So he is sitting in the middle, so in his opinion, he is the center of the universe. As you can see, there are still some empty seats, so you are invited to join the meal. It could be lunch, it could be dinner. And I'm volunteering to go with you. So in that occasion, what can you expect? What are the typical Chinese food? Now, I think you could expect something like this. You have rice, either rice or noodles or buns. So those are the things we call staple foods. And you also can imagine some protein food. So here I put duck and fish as an example. And you also have vegetables. And in the end, we don't normally serve fancy dessert, but we provide fruit. So which is better? This is a very nice picture. It's pretty balanced diet. But of course, the reality is not always as wonderful as the picture. So let's go to the reality. It doesn't want to go to reality. Okay, so now we have a table which is quite different from the previous table. It's a little bit boring, but still the message, the content is the same. So in the first column, there are major food groups. And the second column is the percent of consumption, which means what is the percentage of children consume this food. As you can see, grains, vegetables, condiments, fat and oils, and protein foods, more than 95%, almost everybody consume it. And then there are still around 50% for fruit, milk and dairy, around 50%. So these are the typical things consumed in the Chinese diet. Then the question would be, which one is contribute the most to the energy? What is the fourth source of energy? Now in this pie chart, you can see grain actually contributes 45% of the total energy. It is the biggest contributor. Second is the protein foods. And within these grams, we have rice, which is the biggest contributor. Second is the noodles, pasta. We don't call it pasta, we call it noodles. And the rolls and buns. So that's why I have these three elements in the first picture. And within these protein foods, you have meat, plant-based protein food, such as soybeans, tofu, and you also have eggs. So those are the major contributors. And now let's focus a little bit on the animal source food. Animal source food here included meat, poultry, eggs, seafood, dairy, and milk, those products. The y-axis shows the percentage of energy coming from the animal source food. And as an epidemiologist, you always want to stratify data by income levels, by location, by gender, by age, et cetera, et cetera. So here I show two examples. First, we stratify the data by location. We call community types here. So we have highly urban, moderate urban, and the rural areas. This is based on the population density, access to public service, such as transport, school, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a publication on this. And you can see in the highly urban area, around 27% energy comes from animal source food, whereas in the rural area, there are only 17%, so it's 10% difference. We did the same thing for household income, and we split this into tertiles, so 33% high, middle 33%, and low 30%. Compared to the lower one, we have here around 25%, and for the lower one, you have only 15%. So there is about 10% difference. And you may say, yeah, it's good to know what do they eat, what type of food do they eat, but we also want to know what or how much nutrients they actually take from this food. So let's move to the nutrient intakes. So the question we want to ask is, do children get enough nutrients? Here, I listed most of the nutrients we analyzed, and the y-axis is the percent of children below the recommendation for this part, which I put it inadequate. And for some nutrients, such as saturated fat and sodium added sugar, it's the percent of children above the recommendation. These blue bars remind me like we are recording a song. So it's going up and down, and this is normal because in the population, the nutrient intake is always a distribution. So you have lower parts, you have higher part. But let's focus on some of the important elements. If these actually nutrients, 50 or 50 more than 50% of the children do not have enough dietary fiber, thiamine, riboflavin, vitamin C, vitamin D, calcium, potassium, and selenium. So this we need to take care. And on the other side, more than 50% of children have too much fat, especially saturated fat, and sodium. As Alice mentioned, added sugar, it seems not that high compared to other countries. Now, we do the same thing again. So we stratify by income levels. Blue represents low income, middle is the red, and the green is the high income. I know there are a lot of narrow bars. It's hard to read. But if you look at it, you will find some patterns. Here, along with the increase of income, the percent of children below the recommendation actually decreased. But on the other side, along with the increase of income, the percent of children have excess intake of these nutrients increased. But there are also some nutrients is independent, so they don't affect it by the family income level, such as dietary fiber. So we said that micronutrient intake are generally better in children from high-income families, but the total and the saturated fat level is also higher, so this is not good. And we did the same thing. We stratified by rural versus urban areas, and you can find very similar trends. From rural to urban, the percent of children below the recommendation decreased, but in this part, the percent of children have excess intakes of these nutrients are actually increased. And this is not totally surprising to us. In fact, we know the income level in rural areas is still lower compared to the urban areas. At least this is the case in China. Now, let's focus on these two interesting nutrients. One is saturated fat, and the red one is sodium. Why I single those two out? Because they show different patterns. We also stratify by family incomes, low, medium, and high. In this part, urban versus rural. You see the red bar, which represents sodium, doesn't vary very much. So 85% almost everywhere. But the blue bars actually increase along with the increase of income, and also high in urban areas. So these two interesting nutrients actually show different patterns. And this tells us something when we do when we're making the public health or nutrition intervention programs or education programs. Now let's move on to the meal pattern. There is a table. On the left side, we have listed meals. We have breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacking. And here we have percent of consuming, which means what is the percentage of children have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the third column we have is the percent of children, a percent of daily energy intake from this eating occasion. So as you can see, most of the children have these three main meals. And dinner actually contributes the most energy. For snacking, there are 70% of children reported having snacking, and they contribute to 10%. I mention this because there's very different snacking habits. In some countries, like US, Australia, they snack more than 95%. Almost every children snack, and they provide 25 to 30% of energy intake. So this is quite different. It's also different between China and Mexico. Here we go a little bit further investigating the snacking. Here we have age groups, and this is the percent of children reported having snacking. And we split the timing of the day. The green line represents morning, blue represents afternoon, and the red represents evening. So from this graph, actually, we can see two things. First, the younger children, higher percent of young children reported snacking occasion compared to the older ones. They are higher. And the second is afternoon is the most popular snacking time. At least this is the case in China. Now, for breakfast, we have a table again. This part is the major food groups, and here is the percent of consuming. We found that grams and protein foods are the most frequently reported foods in breakfast. On the right panel, we want to show the energy contribution compared to its, the nutrient contribution compared to its energy contribution. We know breakfast actually contributes 25% of the daily energy, so we have drawn a line here. This is 25%. The y-axis is the total intake of each nutrient. And this red part is the nutrient we want to limit it. So in the breakfast, we see that breakfast actually contributes disproportionately compared to its energy contribution, more added sugar and less vitamin C. Of course, here I'm not saying for each eating occasion, you have to, the nutrient contribution need to match the energy contribution. So I'm not saying that, because probably in breakfast, it's not a good occasion to have too much vitamin C in the food culture. It's just not in the food culture. However, this gives us some indication of the food quality. This is very similar structure. Here we're looking at snacking. Sometimes it's also called in-between meals. We have major food groups and percent consuming. Here, fruit and snacking sweets are the most frequent reported fruit. And we did it again. We know snacking actually contributes 10% of the total energy, so we draw a line. And we found snacking actually contributes disproportionately more fiber, vitamin C, calcium, and added sugar. So snacking, I'm not advocate for snacking. I'm not promoting snacking, but it does contribute to some positive nutrients, especially in China, because the most reported food, most of the frequently reported food is fruits. Now, about the double burden of malnutrition. So this is categorized by the coexistence of underweight and overweight. Here we have two age groups, 2 to 6 years old and 7 to 12 years old. And in each age group, we have 3 weight status: underweight, overweight, obesity. And we stratified again by area, urban versus rural, and we stratified by the household income levels. So as you can see, in the rural areas, the underweight actually is very high, 20%, 26% when it's getting older. As compared to the urban area, it's only 14%, 13%. Is 14%, 30% very low? No, but it is better than the rural area. But on the opposite side, the obesity rate prevalence is 17%, overweight is 19% in the urban areas, and you compare to the rural areas, which is less than 10%. So you see the disparity already here. Similar structure you can see in the household levels, 19% compared to, this is the underweight, 18%, this is 30%, and this is 17%, this is 17%. So the overweight, obesity is always high in the higher income families. So we conclude that the higher percentage of overweight and obese were found in the children in urban settings and also from the higher income households. So there are some, this is the summary. In terms of nutrient intakes, most of the children do not meet the dietary intake recommendation for dietary fiber, calcium, vitamin D. So those are the three elements we miss the most. And there are also some vitamins, vitamin B1, B2, vitamin C, and selenium is also missing. 30% of children actually below zinc recommendation. Iron, I pointed out here because it is still an issue in the rural area. Over 80% of children have too much sodium intake. Over 60% of children have too much saturated fat intake. The animal source food contribute more energy in children living in urban areas compared to, and also in the high-income families. About the food meals, meal patterns, so most of children have 3 main meals, and 70% of children having snacks, and that's contribute to 10% of the total energy. So this gives us a bigger picture, overall picture of what is the nutritional status among Chinese children. And here also we have a double burden of disease because it's a coexist of underweight and also overweight. So what does it mean and what we can do with it? So I think if we can summarize, the nutrition status is still challenging in Chinese children because they are missing a lot of micronutrients, and also the saturated fat and sodium intake is excessive. The disparity we found from the energy source, food source and the nutrient intakes along the coexistence of under and overweight suggest we need to specific strategies to improve the dietary quality. And why that is specific? Because there are different trends in different issues in different communities. Here, the nutrition education and the nutrition intervention programs targeting to the vulnerable population are needed. So this is the conclusion. In the end, I would like to thank you. And if you have any questions or any comments, please keep your thought. I would like to, I'm very happy to talk with you and discuss with you during the break, or in the afternoon, we have a discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very clear, lucid presentation. I think we're going to move straight ahead with our next speaker from down south in Mexico. Lovely to see Dr. Salvador Walapando, who is the head of